Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're just scratching your head trying to figure out what's wrong with your car? It just doesn't make sense, right? Well, today I'm going to go over one of the things that you need to keep an eye out for, especially if you have like a new car that you just bought or you just don't know. We're going to talk about that today. So this is our new project, Fox. You guys have seen it on the channel a few times already. And this car does not run the best. I mean, when I say not run the best, I mean this car has aftermarket heads, upper and lower intake, and it is slower than a bone stock car. So it got me thinking, what's wrong with this thing? Of course, one of the first things that I did was go in, do a base idle reset, set the timing on it, and got rid of that cold air kit over there. And I've not bolted all this down yet because I'm just trying to test it all. That definitely helped the car a little bit, for sure. If you guys don't know, these mass airflow meters are very sensitive to turbulence. So we all know your fan blows air back this way or sucks air back this way. And if you have a cold air kit with, say, a filter that just sits right here, it can actually cause a turbulence. So with all that being said, I went ahead and just put a factory air box back on this car, and we will button everything down, put a nice new filter in it here pretty soon. But that's not the point of this video. So that's definitely something for you guys to check. You can experiment, you can kind of block the wind from your filter and see if your car runs a little differently. Check that, guys, see if that doesn't help you. Maybe it'll make a difference. But that's really not what this video is about. So we took this car out yesterday and drove it, and not only did it not have any power, it just is super lethargic. It, like, when you touch the throttle on this thing, it takes like a full second for it to respond. One of the first things that you need to do is, like I said, check your timing, do a base idle reset, check your plugs. So the plugs on this car, hold on, let me just go over here and show you guys. So remember, this car has aftermarket heads. These are the Canfield 192cc heads. So these are the plugs that I pulled out of the car. Now, you guys that have been around the race world for a while, or just the car game in general, know what's going on here. Let me show you what should have been in this car. This plug on the left is what should have been in these heads. If you match them up seat to seat, look how much further that plug sticks out into the head. Now, I'm not going to go through a list of heads that require the longer threads. Most all aftermarket heads are going to require that, but just look it up yourself, see what spark plug they call for. That more than likely is part of the problem as to why this car does not run good. You may already know this information, but if you just bought a car, one of the first things that you might want to do is check the plugs, because not only could it have the wrong plugs in it, they could be gapped wrong, right? And that's going to cause your car to not run good. Speaking of which, let's talk about gap on these plugs. So what am I going to gap these plugs at? This is an NA car, nothing crazy, a set of heads and an upper and lower intake. That's it. I'm gapping my plugs at 35 thousandths. That seems to be a good number for pretty much anything. Now, so if you have a really small gap, it's harder to blow that spark out rather than a big gap. A big gap is going to make the spark a little weaker, and it's easier to blow it out. That's 100% a problem. If you have a boosted car and you try to gap this thing at 45 thousandths and you're on 10, 15, 20 pounds, it will blow the spark out almost every single time. Well, if it works for a boosted car, it'll work for an NA car. None of my cars run rich at idle. They idle just fine, no issues whatsoever. All right, enough of that. Let's go ahead and get these plugs in the car. Guys, we got Neo on the phone. He called while I was doing my time lapse. So Neo, you got any tips or anything like that you want to mention?
It's always vacuum. Spark plug wires, cap and rotor.
Let's see if it's any more responsive than what it was. Car seems a little more responsive, but there is a noticeable pop back through the intake. Let's see if I can replicate it one more time for you guys. that is a very common problem with these cars, especially when they're cold. Now, it could be a couple of things. Typically, it's like a timing issue. It could be a temperature sensor issue over here. So your ECT could be bad. Or it could be that your valves are out of adjustment. Also, it could be a vacuum leak. So there's a few different things here that could cause this. Typically, that's going to be a valve adjustment issue. I just got off the phone with Neo, and I mentioned it to him to see what he said. His very first thing was the valves, and I happen to agree. I think these valves are too tight on this car. So why don't I go ahead, pull the intake off this thing, get the valve covers off, and I'll pick back up with you guys on how, once again, to adjust your valves very, very quickly. We have the valve cover off, and what I'm doing right now is just going through and checking. But what you do is you loosen it up. It's a 5/8 on these. You take your inner lock nut, which is a 3/16 Allen, back it off a little bit, give yourself some room. Go down finger tight just till it stops. That's 0 lash. Give yourself an indicator right here. We're going to go about a half, not quite. So probably about right there. Stop. Cinch up your inner lock nut. Okay, and that should be that. So go in there, bump the key over, I'll tell you when to stop. What we're doing is making sure this thing is on base circle. So this particular rocker right here. Yep. All right, it's good. Okay, so the fact that it did not move and all the rest did tells me that it is on base circle. So we're just gonna go ahead and adjust this one out. All right, guys, so that's the technique. I'm gonna go through this thing, do that, I'll let you know if it helped or not. What are you doing, baby?
I'm sitting in your car.
Do you like this car?
Yes. I'll stay here. She loves this car. Stay here.
I'm telling you guys, it's the red interior. That's why everybody likes it. Madison's been sitting in here the whole time. All right, let's see if it'll start up. Let me check the plug wires real quick. 5, 6, 7, 8. That was horrible. That was horrible. Well, I'm going to mess around with it a little while longer, see what I can come up with, and see if we can get this thing to pump back up, because none of them should be that loose. But I'll go ahead, check it out, and get back with you guys in just a minute. We had a little issue to start with when we first put the car back together. Found out that I had missed 2 of the rockers. I guess I just didn't tighten them down good. Look, let me give you guys some advice. So if you can, just like make sure that you're not talking, running your mouth while you're doing something like adjusting the valves, things like that, because you'll get sidetracked on which one you're working on. And I had left 2 of them loose, one on each side. So just be mindful, take your time with it. So let's go ahead, cross our fingers, and hope that this thing works. I'm sure it will. Now, I do not know where the skip was coming from the first time. Nice, check that out. Man, it already runs better. Cool. Look at that. No popping back through the intake. Car idle's good. No popping back through the intake. So I assume that in the end it was the valves, I guess. Now, when we did first adjust the valves, it popped back through the intake still, but we had a couple that were way too loose. And there again, you know, you need to have them adjusted outright. Don't ever say, well, they're too loose. That's obviously not the issue. Don't ever do that. Just go ahead, readjust them again, and you'd be surprised. I mean, what was it, right? I just want to take you guys along for the ride, work on this whole thing, and show you that we are making a little bit of progress here and there. And I need to go drive it real quick before it gets completely dark, because we don't have headlights. Difference. Man, that's nice. difference the correct plugs will make. Man, I am so excited for this. I'm telling you, guys, there's something to be said about a good automatic car. I love the red interior. Man, I'm just ready to finish this thing up and actually drive it. I think it's gonna need a new fuel filter and all that type stuff, because every once in a while it wants to kind of bobble or act crazy. But guys, this thing is just perfect. Perfect. Love it. All right, well, that's it, guys. The car's running great. Thank you so much for staying with me. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this one up. And as always, thanks for watching.
Electrical sensing. So any sort of manipulation to that airflow, just simply riding by like a freaking straight rip, is going to mess up your signal.
Exactly. We got Neo on the phone. He called while I was doing my time lapse, and you probably can't hear him good, but we were just talking about that the turbulence from the mass airflow meter, like when your fan is blowing back on it, and it does cause problems, and Neo can attest to that. But also, he brought up a good point with these little cheap air filters. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Like a filter that flows really good, you kind of got to ask yourself, why does it flow so good? A lot of times they're a real open filter, and that's not the best. Back in the day, you remember when we used to oil the filters up?
That's correct.
Yeah, so we used to oil our filters up, which honestly was a pretty good thing, other than the fact that you could suck oil up into the mass air. So Neo, you got any tips or anything like that you want to mention?
As far as the turbulence is concerned?
Well, whatever you want to talk about. Honestly, really this video is like whenever you first buy a project car, like some of the things that you might want to look at if the car's not running right.
First things right off the bat, and I don't mean to run you over.
No, go ahead.
Yep. It's always vacuum. Spark plugs, spark plug wires, cap and rotor, vacuums. It's just like when people say, especially on what you got going on right there, you got a lightly modified FOXBODY, which is where we're all been, or where we want to be, or whatever, right?
That's right.
So who's to say that the guy who owned it before, nothing wrong with him, I'm not talking about his skill with mechanics, but who's to say he knew what he was doing with the vacuum and the vacuum tree?
Very true. Well, okay, so let me elaborate on that real quick. Like, he's 100% correct. All right, you guys remember when we first bought this car, we got it home, car wasn't running right. Come to find out there was a vacuum line off on the vacuum tree over there. So that was simple. That's an honest mistake. It happens. But yes, that's a very good point. Now, Neo can tell you your vacuum is vacuum, but you still have to have it hooked up correct, going to the right things. But vacuum is vacuum, guys. Find somewhere for it to plug into. You can plug it into the intake. You can tee off on the vacuum tree. I mean, you can add T's, add Y's, whatever you want to do. But
forgiving. You're exactly right. It's very forgiving. I mean, if you get unmetered air, your car ain't gonna be right. Just like you're doing right now. I mean, you're doing the basic. This is what this is one of the things that was a problem. You had a problem with spark plug length. That's always a problem.
Mm-hmm.
The wrong spark plugs. I mean, the wires, being burned up, the vacuums being wrong, especially when somebody's had their fingers in it too. So, I mean, usually most stock engines, you're looking for dry rotted stuff. You're looking for, broken wires for sure. You're looking for cracked and broken vacuum. At this point, these vacuum lines are just literally what's snapping you've probably seen it, man. They just dry rot. They don't look dry rot. They look like they're good, but then they're like broken as soon as you touch them.
For sure. And that's another thing that I want to mention. Don't be afraid to put a little rubber line, like a little rubber hose, to connect. So let's say, actually, somebody has already done it right there. There's a perfect example, guys. So this vacuum line looks like it broke, and you can put a little small rubber line. I don't know the size of it. And you can adapt these back together. So don't freak out and think you have to go find this plastic line again. You really don't. Just get you a hose in there and adapt it up. Another thing that I want to mention, just real quick, and this is something that I like to talk about a lot, that number 8 injector will come unplugged. I don't know what it is, and it's always on under your intake, and it's really hard to find.
It's hiding in the back.
It's hiding in the back, guys. But reach around, do the old reach around. Yeah, we're doing reach arounds. You can sometimes come through here and check, but make sure that number 8 injector is plugged in, because that thing will come undone, and also number 4 back here, because that's where all your EGR stuff is. And a lot of times, as you're moving wires around, it'll actually just pop that plug off. So check all of your injectors if your car's not running right. Obviously, timing.
Exactly.
Yep.
The plug-in, check the seating.
Yep.
You know, somebody who's screwed around with the upper lower intake, you know, might not have put the fuel rails on right.
Yep. Oh, here's another good tip. So let me show these guys. Now Neo's not seen this yet, but you see this dab of solder right here on my throttle blade? That was where somebody had drilled a hole. That's something that we used to do back in the day when idle air control stuff wasn't working right. We were trying to get our cars to idle better, and you know, it was a workaround. I'm not going to tell you that it didn't work, but this car would not idle down, right? You could screw the idle screw all the way out on this thing and it still would not idle down. So what you can do, now you got to be careful guys, because this thing does have seals and bushings and stuff in it, but take your throttle body off, heat it from the back side with a small little butane torch, and take you a dab of solder, and you can solder that hole back up and it'll never go anywhere. You'll be good to go. Neo, look, man, I'm not gonna hold you up, bro. I just wanted to chit chat with you. Thought we would throw you on here real quick, like guys. I'm gonna hang out with Neo for a second on the phone. We got the spark plugs back in the car. Hopefully this is it. I'll put it all back together and we'll bust this thing off. I'll catch you in just a minute.